Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll start the Zevachim daf Peiches. We are going to begin on Peiches Amud Aleph by the new Mishnah. Kli halach mikanchin es halach. So when it comes to items in which are in a kli sharis, if they're designated these measuring utensils for liquid, so if you put liquid in it, then it will actually sanctify it. But it has to be a liquid for a kli which is specifically designated for it. For example, various flasks for dam or wine or for oil. For that matter, the Mishnah says, "Uminis yavish mikadeshes es yavish." So, let's say, for example, you have two measures of that which is dry. So it says, "Shtei midos shel yavish haya." Shem isaron v'chatzi isaron. You have an isaron and a chatzi isaron. Isaron lumedidas kol menachos. So an isaron, that kli, is utilized for measuring all flour offerings, and the chatzi isaron is lachsus bo minchas chaviti kohen gadol. Machasisa b'boiker, machasisa b'erev. The kohen gadol would bring a flour offering twice, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. It was in its entirety isaron, but it was half and half in the morning, half in the afternoon. So he had a special kli specifically for that. Now, you can only be mekadesh those flours if it's in a kli which is specifically geared for dry items. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Okay, when you say what's mekadesh as the yavish, in kli halach mekadesh as the yavish, v'lo yavish mekadesh as halach, which seems to be a little bit obvious because we just basically said yavish has to be with yavish, so obviously that would infer yavish should not be with lach. Okay, kli hakodesh shenikvu. Now, on a separate discussion, let's say you have a kli which actually has a hole in it. So, does it have utility? It depends. Im oisemehen mein malachton. If you could still use it for its designated purpose, shoy oisin vehein shleimin, and otherwise it's when it would be complete. Mekanchin v'imlav in mekanchin. So basically, the idea is that if the hole is so significant that you can't use it, then it's not going to be mekanchin. The kulan in mekanchin el b'kodesh. It has to be in the mikdash. We'll see what that's coming to exclude. But again, as Rashi says, it has to be in the azar. So if you have a kli shadis, which is b'chutz, it's not going to be mekadesh. Says the Gemara. So Omer Shmuel lo shanu. The only time we said, says Rashi, in kli halach mekadesh yavesh is ela midos. Only if we're talking about measuring utensils. So when it comes to a dry items, there's only two. There's an isaron and chatzi isaron. For the mincha and for the minchas chaviti kohen gadol. However, Rashi points out there's more measurements when it comes to liquid items. There's actually 7 midos. Shahayusham hin, and half a hin, ushlish hahin, a third, etc. So you have a hin, a half, a third. Givan dahanach l'chozu liyavish l'midi l'madoid. So these measurements, these kalim, these measuring utensils, are only for liquid. They would serve no purpose for the saron or chatzi saron. V'heinu nimshachu elu medida. And the whole purpose of its anointment was dafka for it to be measured. It has to be dafka measuring these liquids. Avol says, the Gemara, mizrakois mekanchin. However, its basins, says Rashi, afal gav de kli halach ninhu mekanchin yavesh. It's considered still a utility for a dried item because it's a larger basin which potentially could also hold dry items. Shenemar shneim leim soilas. Shneim leim soilas, right, which we say in Rosh Chodesh, laning. Now, shnehem could be alluded to as both of them, which means it could be referring to a davar lach and davar yavesh is maleim soilas. So therefore, it can be filled with flour. And therefore, even though it's a kli which is usually designated as mizrakois for liquid, nonetheless, since flour could be put into there, so therefore it can be mekadesh. I don't understand. Says Rashi, the haksiv bulul v'shemen. So mincha, okay, fine, it has flour, which is a davar yavish, but it's mixed in with oil, which therefore makes it into a liquid. So how can you learn out from this pasuk that you can be mekadosh yavish? This is a davar lach. So it's referring to the yavish that's inside of it, because it's impossible to be able to mix the whole thing unless there's a little bit of yavish still in there, right? You didn't, even though it's true, there's a lot of oil, but there may be some clumps or whatever which are still not really so saturated with oil, and so yavish. Iboy say alternatively, mincha legabi dam ki yavish dami. Mincha in relation to dam is like yavish, and therefore vishaper kaposhimine yavish gomer. It can actually be compared to yavish gomer. Omer Shmuel, kli sharis ein mekanchin el shleiman. So it says a kli sharis can't be mekadosh unless it's a complete kli. Ein mekanchin el malayin. It has to be a full measurement. Ein mekanchin el mitoichan. Only the inside, not the outside of the kli. V'yamrulan, some say ein mekanchin el shleiman. It has to be again complete. Umalayim in a full measurement. Ubimifnim, and in the outside. Now, that's basically sounds like the same thing. So, my benayu, birtzi midos. It says bifnim, which means in the right place. It doesn't say mitoichan, but rather it says bifnim. So, what does that mean? So, the distinction would be the overflow of above the kli. Because you could have a kli, and then above it could have a little bit, based on tension, you can possibly have a little bit more liquid above the kli. And therefore the question is, it's not really mitoichan, it's not physically in the kli, but nonetheless it's still inside the proper place. Says Rashi, Amanda Tani ein mekanchin el mitoichan, has to be inside ksaver birtzum midos luniskachu, right? El mashe b'toich chalol shel kli, has to be inside the cavity of the kli itself. Birutzi midos goitshi midos, again it is, as they said, surface tension, it's above it. Uputihi b'menachos, etc. Okay, so that would be the nafkamina between the two shitas. All right. So let's keep on moving. The masnisa tan ein mekanchin el shleiman, has to be complete kli. Umalayim has to be a full measurement. And umetoichan, and it has to be inside ubifnim. So it's not that it chooses one over the other; it uses both of these lashanis. So and therefore, because of that, it would obviously exclude the berutzi midos. Okay. Rav Asi Rav Yochanan lo shanu elishin. The only time we say this is if your intention is not to add. If in fact your intention is to add, then each drop becomes kodesh right away. Says Rashi, lo shanu tadim in mekanchin el malayim, that has to be full, is only referring to shein daitel hashlim. Your intention is not to complete it. Ad kashir, to add onto the measurement. Okay, but if in fact your intention was to do so, therefore even the first drops, even though the first drops are not necessarily, obviously doesn't reach the shear, nonetheless it's kodesh. Tanami hachi malayim ein malayim el shleiman. Full means complete. That's when you didn't want to add to it. If you did have the intention to complete the measure, Rishon Kodesh becomes Kodesh immediately. Okay, let's look at question TA8. B'masnisa tana ein kli sharis mekachin ella. Elo dala devarim bi'inan latana dehach masnisa. So, as we said, it has to be shleiman, a complete kli. It has to be full, the proper measurement. Mitoichan has to be inside the kli. And mibifnim has to be in the proper location. So those are all the requisites for this. And it's the exact same question as TB11. So let's see if I wrote Shalim b'loy chesroinais, Malay b'loy chaser, Bifnim, Mateches, Yavish, Yavish, Shalach, Balach. Again, I don't think I got all the answers there, but I came pretty close. That's TB11. Okay, again, let's not forget you have to memorize 30 blot closed book Gemara for these tests. So, not so simple. Ein kli alach mekadesh v'chul. So Rav Itim Rav Asi ein mekadshin lekarev avol mekadshin lipsul. So we say that when a kli, which is a davar lach, is for you put in yavesh or vice versa, so it's not going to be mekadesh lekarev. In other words, you can't be makriv with it. Avol mekadshin lipsul. However, it does take upon itself the din of becoming apostle. So that is, says Rashi, Shim yotzu chutzul kalayim, that if you would now take it outside of the proper place, or noigabo tvul nifsul, right? It'll still become apostle. Yahanili kli l'hakshir lefasoil. It's strong enough that it can make it apostle. Okay. So yikadamas di laha. Ein mavian manachais v'nesachim u'minchas behema bikurim min hamaduma. You're not allowed to bring a flower offering, its libations, a minchas behema, or a firstborn animal from these mixtures, where there's this element of confusion. V'entzach loimim arla of kalei karim, you cannot bring. V'im hevi lo kiddush. If you did, it's not mekadesh. Says Rashi, v'aflo bi shemutu l'kohanim. Even though these things are mutter to a kohen, Be'inan mutter l'chol Yisrael, shenemer mimayshke Yisrael min hamutter l'Yisrael. It has to be something which is mutter for everyone, not just the Kohanim, and certainly Arel, which is also to Kohanim, will be a problem. And it will not become sanctified. Amarav yitim ravasi lo kadosh karvel v'kadosh l'psul. So regarding this, that's what we're saying. That it only doesn't become kaddish, but it has the capacity to apostle. Okay, let's look at question 5. Elu bezel fanim husker b'gemara l'gabi menachos shis kadshu b'kli lifsol v'lo l'karev. That's possible that you cannot be makarev, you can't not bring it up. So one, as we said, if it's in the wrong kli, right? Mekashin b'kli lach midos. Umincha min hamaduma, if you have a flower offering from a mixture, from Arel or Klei Karim, so you can't bring that. Okay. Tanabun. Kli Kodesh and Nikvu. So our Mishnah said, what happens when you have a Kli Kodesh which has a hole in it? So ein matichin oitai, you cannot melt it. The ein matichin l'toichan ever, you cannot melt to it lead. Nifkamu, if there's a pagam in it, there's something wrong with the kli, in mesaknin oisan. We're not going to fix it up. And this is all based on the concept, as Rashi says, the mixi kanias v'lav arach ira. There's a concept of enanias b'makam ashiris. The base of Mikdash is a makam of ashiris. We're supposed to show of wealth, that we're not being skimpy. And therefore, when it comes to these things, if you would fix them, it kind of shows that you're being cheap. Instead of just getting a new kli, you just want to spend a couple pennies to fix it. That doesn't look good. And therefore, all these different items, if they have holes, you can't fix them and melt them or put lead into them. Sakin, when it comes to a knife, shenifkam, let's say it has some type of nick in the knife, ein mashchizin es pigimasa. You can't file this knife to remove it from these pigimos. Nishmata in machazir naisa. Let's look in Rashi. Nifkamo pigima gedoylo. So there's a huge problem. Shatikin, they want to fix it because it's like recognizable that there's this problem. So then you cannot fix that knife. Abashol oimer sakin mitarefes haisa b'mikdash. There was actually a somewhat of a softer type of knife that often, because its softness, developed numerous pigimois on it often. V'nimnu leha kohanim v'ganzua. And the Chachamim basically decided that even though it's true, it does happen a lot, that we're still going to not allow it to get fixed. Rather, it was just buried. So again, just demonstrate in Anias b'makom ashiris. Tanaban, big de kahuna, ein oisa noisa maisi mechet, elo maisi oidig. When it comes to the big de kahuna, you cannot use needlework. In other words, taking from several pieces of cloth, rather masa oirig. It can be woven together, shenemer masi oirig. So that much we will allow. Nisgolu, let's say the garment got dirty in mechabsin. We're not going to lie to wash it, a little bit neser, a little bit ohel. Now with oil, or with this type of a soap, because again, it shows that you're belittling it. The fact that you have to keep washing it instead of just getting new garments. I habamayim mechabsin. To mashma, you could wash it with regular water. So if the problem is that it looks like a nius, so what's the difference if you use soap or use water? Apparently, it should still be problematic. You shouldn't be able to do that either. So this is what it means. Let's say that the stain isn't so bad that all you need is a little bit of water to get the stain off. So that's not a big deal. We'll allow you to do that, to get that stain. And not only that, oil. You can even use a more potent type of cleansing device in order to be able to get that minor stain out. As we continue to pay chesed base. However, hugu, if let's say it's quite dirty, when neser oil that you would need, it's so dirty that you would need these cleansing agents to get the dirt out. So then apamayim in mechabsin, you're not going to even allowed to use water, even though the water won't do a full job. You can't even do that. Perhaps you can't wash the garments at all. Tanabon. Me'il, when it comes to, now we're going to talk basically for the rest of this Amud, we're going to be talking of the various garments of the Kohen Gadol. We're going to be analyzing his special Big Day Kahuna, and we'll see a little bit about some of its powerful effects. Tanabon. Me'il, kul shel tacheles haya. It was all made out of blue. Shenemar, as we find in the pasuk, v'yasas me'il ha'efan masi oirig klil tacheles. So it says it was klil tacheles, was made out of blue wool. Shuv, its hem, ketzad. How exactly did that go about? So maybe tacheles, they're arguing talash shani shizurin. They would take blue and purple and scarlet and they would spin it all together. The ice come in rimoinim, and they would make these types of pomegranates shlu pischu that are not open. They're closed up. They're not opened up. They look like unripened pomegranate. Ukamin kainois shel kansa shibarashi tinoikais. It's comparable to these type of cones in the hands of the children. And Rashi says it's kamin tikshel nechayshes. It's some type of a container of copper. Anyway, umevi shivim ushnayim zogin shebehen. They would have 72 bells. Shivim ushnayim in bolin. That within them they would have 72 clappers. The clapper is inside of a bell, that little stick that when you shake it, it makes noise. So they had 72 of these, which made noise. It's interesting, like chai, state pamim chai, 36 and 36. There's actually 18 on this side, 18 on the other side. Amrav in Yoni bar Sasoin, Kamachloikis Bakan, Kach Machloikis B'Moris Negoyim. There's actually a similar machlokas between these two shitas regarding the dinim of someone who is tameh by the seeing of saras, ditnan. Moris Negoyim, Reb Daisi ben Horkanis Omer Lamed Vav. There was actually 36 different types of saras. A kavia ben mahalil omer shivim mishnayim. So obviously there's a correlation, as we're going to see, between the bells, which make noise, and lashon hara. So there's actually that same amount of saras corresponding to the sound of the bells of the zogin, of these bells on the garment of the Kohen Gadol. Yomi Reb in Yoni bar Sasan. Lominus Machaparshas Karbanos Parshas Beit Kahuna. Finally got to a little bit of a Agadata. We've been waiting 88 blocks to get to an Agadata. So maybe there was one other piece of Agadata somewhere sprinkled in here. But why do we have Parshas Karbanos next to Beit Kahuna? Lomicha. Makabanos Machaprin, Beit Kahuna, Machaprin. The very garments of the Kohen Gadol is Machaper. So how do we see this? Kasainis, his shirt, is Machaperes al Shvichas Dam. It's Machaper on murder. And we'll understand a little bit of why some of these are keneged all these different sins. Shenemar, it says, V'yishchatu sir izim, that they shechted a goat, v'yitbulu es hakatonet badam. And of course, this is referring to Yosef at Tzaddik, that they dipped his garment into blood, and therefore this garment also reminds us of Shvichas Damim. It's actually quite interesting because this pasuk, right? So let's see the whole pasuk. Vayikach es kasenis Yosef yishchatu seir izim v'yitbu es hakutones badam. So again, this is interestingly enough. This was just in this week's parsha, Parshas Vayeshev, discussing the brothers who did this to Yosef. It's interesting, Shvichas Damim, they did not murder him. But nonetheless, that's what it's compared to. They sold him to Mitzrayim. Okay, so that itself is an interesting thing to consider. All right. Okay, there's a beautiful Taisus over here, which goes in great length. Mechnasayim mechaprin al bigdei al gilurayas. Your pants are connected to gilurayas. We can understand a little bit about that. But shnemer va'asalahem mechnasei bad l'chasos es basar ereva. It says the purpose of the pants is to cover up the ereva. Mitznefes, which is the hat, is machaperes al gasi haruach. You're haughty, so it's on your head. Right? Menayin. So Omer Chanina, Yavo Dover should be goiva v'chapral goiva. Let something which is put on the high part of your head, mechaper, for someone who thinks highly about themselves. Avnei, the belt, mechaper al hear her alave, regarding the thoughts of the heart. Heicha de'isa, which is where it is. It says Rashi, Shahi Chaygrin Keneged Atzilia Dehen, Danu Keneged Alev. As we saw, this is back in Daf Yud Tes, basically where the elbows end. So the gartel, this is actually in the middle of Chabad, they wear their gartel somewhat pretty high up, which is Keneged Atzilia Halev. So, and therefore it makes sense, it's Keneged Hirur. Chayshin, the breastplate, is Mechaper al Hadinim, improper justice. Shnemer v'yasiso chayshin mishpa. Ephod, with the other garment of the Kohen Gadol, is Mechaper al Vodas Kachavim. Shnemer in Ephod the Terafim. So this other interesting pasuk, which is quoted from Sefer Hosea, says Ki Yamim Rabim. It was many days. Yeshu b'nei Yisrael, they were sitting in Melch without a king. Ve'in Sar, there's no leader. Ve'in Zavat, no sacrifice. Ve'in Matseva, there was no Matseva. It says Ve'in Ephod u'Terafim. So Terafim also allude to like the Terafim, which are the Terafim that Rachel took from her father Lavan. Me'il Mechaper Loshen Har, and this is where we want to get to. The Me'il is Mechaper Loshen Har. Menayin Ramachanina Yavadavar Shebakoil v'Yechaper al Davar Koil. Well, that's something which makes noise, a cover for something which makes noise, and that's really what Loshen Hara is. But Loshen Hara is basically just you want to make noise. It's just because you want to be able to be heard, and that's the same idea. But sits Mechaper al Azas Panim, someone who is brazen. But sits Ksiv Ahayal Metzach Aharoin. This should be on your forehead. Azas Panim Ksiv Metzach Isha Zoyna Hayalucha. Any Rabbi Yishmael Levi Shnei Devarim Lo Matzinu Lehen Kapara b'Karbanos. There's no kapara by the Karbanos. Matzinu Lehen Kapara b'Makam Acher. There's other ways of achieving kapara for certain sins. V'Elhein Shvichas Dam Loshen Hara. Shvichas damim megla rufa. We learn now shvichas damim, someone who murdered, and we don't know who that person is, so we bring an egla rufa. V'lashon hara mikatayris. When we bring the spices, so that atones with the lashon hara. Titani Rabbi Chananya menayin l'katayris mechaperes. How do you know that the spices that are mechaper in the kodesh is mechaper? Shneimar v'yitin es hakatayris v'chaper al ha'am. V'tani Rabbi Shmuel al ma katayris mechaperes lashon hara. Yavadaber shebachashai v'chaper al masi chashai. So when it comes to a person who speaks lashon hara, this is something which is done quietly, speaking behind someone's back. So it's the same thing when it comes to the ketairis, which is done inside the kodesh. So anyway, kasha lashon hara, kasha shvichas damim. So what is it? Is shvichas damim? Do we derive it from the kasainis, or do we derive it from engarufa? Is lashon hara learned from the me'il? Is it machaper from the me'il, or is it machaper from the ketairis? So lokasha hadi yadi man dekatle hadalo yadi man katla. If you know if you don't know who did the killing, so then you bring an engarufa. But if you do know, but there is some other loophole, as Rashi says, so you know who is. So how do you get kapara? You're going to get kapara by the big de kahuna. Okay, so understand. The other man katle bar katolu, you should kill him. The mezil asribe. So he did b'mezil, but there's no hasra, so it's like a loophole. So you can't kill him. So the begadim will mimachaper the ksainus. Lashon hara namlu kasha habasan habavar hesia. Says Rashi, if it was done privately, the havidavar shebachashoy, then the ketairis will mimachaper. It was before hesia. That's a davar shebekoil, and therefore the palmoinim, the bells and the pomegranates of the meal is what will be machaper. Question 6. Ma machaper lashon hara. So again, as we said, in the event that it was done b'sina, then it's the ketairis. Pavar hesia, it's the me'il. Shvichas damim, if you don't know who it was, eglarufa. If you do know who it is, they just didn't get hasra or whatever, then it's the kasainis, it's the garment. Okay, let's just take a peek. This would be an easy other question. Nothing for TA, unbelievably. And also not for TB. Okay. Hanulach hamizbech mekadesh, hanulach hamizbech mekadesh, hanulach hamizbech mekadesh. We have finished the parak, and then we're going to be now doing a very interesting parak, which a lot of it's connected to Tfilas HaShachar and other things. Kol hatader. Kol hatader mechavero koydem es chavero. Anytime you have something which happens more frequently, in other words, if you have tader, v'shenu tader koydem, and this is going to be the parak which is going to talk about a lot of those dinim.